Hello, welcome back to Regulatory Affairs 101. I am Nancy. Today, we're diving into the Prescription Drug Marketing Act, the PDMA. This is the federal law that protects the U.S. drug supply chain from diversion, counterfeiting, and unsafe handling. If you work in regulatory, quality, or distribution, this one's for you. Let's get into it. Here's what you will walk away knowing by the end of this video. 5 things. 1. The purpose and legislative history of the PDMA. 2. The regulatory framework under 21 CFR Parts 203 and 205. 3. The core provisions, drug sample distribution, reimportation restrictions, and wholesale distribution requirements. 4. Compliance and enforcement, including penalties. And 5. How the PDMA compares to the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, the DSCSA. There's a lot of ground to cover, so let's get started at the beginning. The PDMA didn't come out of nowhere. It started with a problem. In June 1985, a congressional subcommittee published a report that identified serious vulnerabilities in the U.S. drug supply chain. Drugs being diverted, resold, improperly stored. By April 1986, a follow-up report, ominously titled Dangerous Medicine, laid the groundwork for legislation. Then, in February 1987, Representative John D. Dangel introduced H.R. 1207 in Congress, the bill that will become the PDMA. It moved fast. On April 22, 1988, President Reagan signed the PDMA into law as Public Law 100-293. The drug sample distribution provisions took effect later that same year in October 1988. But the law continued to evolve. In 1992, Congress enacted the Prescription Drug Amendments, the PDA, which further strengthened the PDMA's requirements. And finally, on December 3, 1999, the FDA published the final rule implementing both the PDMA and the PDA. That's 21 CFR Part 203, published it in the Federal Register at 64 FR 67756. So, problem identified, legislation introduced, signed into law, strengthened, and then formally codified in the CFR. That's the arc. The PDMA is implemented through 2 key parts of the Code of Federal Regulations. Let's walk through both. 21 CFR Part 203 is the operational backbone. It governs reimportation of prescription drugs, wholesale distribution requirements, drug sample distribution, and sales restrictions for hospital and healthcare entity purchased drugs. Part 203 implements both the original PDMA of 1987 and the Prescription Drug Amendments of 1992. 21 CFR Part 205 is the licensing floor. It establishes the minimum standards that states must meet when licensing prescription drug distributors. That includes personal qualifications, facility requirements, security, record keeping, and written policies and procedures. Think of it this way. Part 205 sets the baseline for who can distribute. Part 203 tells them how. Now let's talk about the core provisions, starting with drug sample distribution. This is the most heavily regulated area under the PDMA, and for good reason. Before this law, drug samples were a major vector for diversion and counterfeiting. There are 4 key requirements. First, written requests require. The licensed practitioner must submit a signed written request before receiving any drug samples. No request, no samples. It's that simple. Second, receipt upon delivery. Every delivery of drug samples must be documented with a signed receipt. This creates accountability at every handoff. Third, annual inventory and reconciliation. Manufacturers and distributors must conduct annual inventories of all drug samples and reconcile their records. If the numbers don't match, that's a red flag. And fourth, storage and handling. Samples must be stored under proper conditions, temperature, humidity, security, to maintain product integrity. Each of these requirements builds a chain of accountability from the manufacturer's warehouse all the way to the practitioner's office. Next, reimportation and sales restrictions, 2 distinct but related areas. On reimportation, the rule is straightforward. Only the original manufacturer may reimport a prescription drug that was previously exported from the United States. There's one narrow exception. The FDA may permit reimportation by others, but only for emergency medical care. Those applications go through the local FDA district office. On sales restrictions, the PDMA prohibits the sales, purchase, or trade of drugs that were purchased by hospitals or healthcare entities or donated to charitable organizations. But these are important exclusions professionals need to know. Group purchasing organization transactions are excluded. So are sales among entities under common control. Emergency medical transfers, government entity transfers, and charitable organization transfers to non-profit affiliates. And returns are exempt, provided they are documented with a credit memo that includes the product name, lot number, quantity, and date, and that proper storage conditions were maintained throughout. The third core provision is wholesale distribution. This is where Part 203 and Part 205 work together. The slide shows 6 key requirements. Let me walk you through them. First, state licensing. Wholesale distributors must hold valid state licenses. The PDMA introduced the concept of an authorized distributor of record, creating a documented, accountable link from manufacturer to distributor. Second, facility standards. Storage facilities must meet specific requirements for temperature control, sanitation, and overall condition. The facility itself has to be up to standard. Third, security. Physical security measures are required to prevent theft, diversion, and contamination, including control access, monitoring, and documentation of any security incidents. Fourth, storage compliance. Beyond the facility itself, distributors must demonstrate ongoing compliance with storage conditions, ensuring drugs are maintained within required temperature and environmental parameters at all times. Fifth, record keeping. Distributors must maintain detailed records of every transaction, purchases, sales, and returns to ensure a complete audit trail. And six, written policies. Every wholesale distributor must have written policies and procedures in place covering each of these areas: licensing, facilities, security, storage, and record keeping. This is the operational playbook. Remember, Part 205 sets the licensing floor at the state level. Part 203 adds the operational requirements on top of that. Together, they form a comprehensive framework for wholesale distribution. Now, beyond the core provisions we've already walked through, Part 203 lays out 5 additional compliance obligations that every manufacturer needs to have locked down. 1. Representative lists. Manufacturers must maintain current, up-to-date lists of every sales representative authorized to distribute drug samples, along with every storage site where samples are held. 2. Sample lot labeling. Each individual sample unit must bear the lot or control number assigned by the manufacturer. This is what makes traceability possible. If there's a recall or a quality issue, that number is how you trace it back. 3. Theft and loss reporting. If drug samples are stolen or there's a significant loss, you must report it to the FDA promptly. That means investigating the incident and notifying the agency within the required time frames. No delays. 4. Charitable donation. Drug samples can be donated to 501c3 charitable institutions, but specific documentations requirements apply. You can't just hand samples over. The paperwork has to be in order. And 5. Internal controls. Manufacturers must implement internal controls designed to guard against errors and fraud, particularly doing inventory counts and reconciliation. Think of this as the self-policing mechanisms built into the regulation. These 5 obligations round out the compliance picture under Part 21 CFR 203. If you've got the earlier provisions covered and these 5 dialed in, you are in strong shape. Now let's look at enforcement, and this is where PDMA has real weight behind it. All penalties for PDMA violations come directly from 21 U.S.C. Section 333, and the statute is very clear about what happens when drug samples or reimportation rules are violated. Criminal penalty section. On the criminal side, the law targets intentional misconduct. If someone knowingly sells, purchases, or trades a drug sample, or knowingly imports a drug in violation of the reimportation ban, or distributes drugs in violation of the sample and wholesale requirements, they can face up to 10 years in prison and fines of up to $250,000. That's written directly into Section 333B1. There are also significant civil penalties for companies. If a representative is convicted of illegal drug sample activity, the manufacturer or distributor can be fined up to $50,000 for each of the first 2 violations within a 10-year period. After the second conviction, that jumps to $1 million per violation. This is spelled out in Section 333B2 and is designed to ensure companies maintain strong internal controls. Additional penalties and whistleblower provision. There's also a separate civil penalty up to $100,000 for failing to submit required drug sample reports under Section 353D3E. And finally, the law includes a whistleblower reward. Anyone who provides information leading to a conviction may receive up to half of the criminal fine, capped at $125,000. That's in Section 333B5, and it reinforces how seriously FDA treats sample diversion. So the takeaway here is simple. PDMA violations aren't just compliance issues. They carry real criminal and civil consequences. This is why sample accountability, documentation, and internal controls are non-negotiable. One of the most common questions I get is, how does the PDMA relate to the DSCSA? Great question. Let me walk you through this comparison. The PDMA was enacted in 1987. The DSCSA, the Drug Supply Chain Security Act, came in 2013. That's a 26-year gap, and the industry has changed dramatically in that time. The PDMA focused on drug samples, reimportation, and wholesale distribution. The DSCSA expanded the scope to full supply chain traceability, from manufacturer all the way through the dispenser. Tracking under the PDMA was paper-based. The DSCSA moved to electronic, interoperable tracking, a fundamental shift. On licensing, the PDMA relied on state-by-state wholesale licensing. The DSCSA established federal standards with a national license framework. And on preemption, the PDMA had limited federal preemption. The DSCSA broadly preempts state requirements to create a unified national system. Here's the key nuance. The DSCSA did not repeal the PDMA. It replaced the PDMA's supply chain tracking provisions with a far more comprehensive electronic system. But, and this is important, the PDMA's drug sample distribution rules remain in full effect. Let's bring it home. 3 things to remember from today. 1. The PDMA established the foundational safeguards for the U.S. drug supply chain, particularly around sample distribution, reimportation, and wholesale distribution. 2. 21 CFR Parts 203 and 205 remain the regulatory backbone for drug sample distribution and distributor licensing. They are current active regulations. 3. The DSCSA replaced the PDMA's supply chain tracking provisions with a modern electronic traceability system, but the PDMA's sample distribution rules endure. The PDMA is not obsolete. Its sample rules are still active law. All the references and source materials for this episode are listed here. If you like the content of this video, please like, subscribe, and comment below. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.